This is a video to review some of the material that we've covered in the Tech Club, and what I'm going to do is demonstrate how to build this etch-a-sketch program and some of the concepts we've used in class, some of the concepts we've covered in class and how they're used in this program. So the way the program works is there's a blinking light to tell you where you're going to draw, and you just use your up, down, left, and right arrow keys to draw whatever shape you like. And that's really all that it does. And when you stop the program and restart it, it clears the screen so that you can do a new drawing. Alright, so I'm just going to stop program and just going to create a new program from scratch that does the same thing. So I'm going to call this etch-sketch demo. First thing I'm going to do is, you can see on my stage here, I've got this cat which I don't need. So I'm going to right click and choose to delete the cat. The other thing that you would have noticed is that my etch-a-sketch was drawing white on black. So, and we haven't really covered this in the class yet, but I'm going to edit the stage. So everything we've done in class so far, the stage has been white, but the stage is just like other sprites in a lot of ways, and I can edit it. And I'm just going to go to the backdrop, and I'm going to choose my paint tool, black. Oops. And now my backdrop is black. That's all I need to do with my backdrop. And next I'm going to create a sprite that I'm going to use as my marker. So I'll click on paint a new sprite. And all I need to do is create a dot here. I'll make it blue for this one. Choose the circle, choose this filled in circle, and when you draw a circle, you can see it's going to come out in different shapes. If you hold down the shift key, it will force it to be a circle. So I'm going to make it, let's see, about that big. So now I've got my circle in the middle of the screen. Another thing we didn't cover very much is you want your sprite to be, you want to define where the middle of that is, which is right where you can see I've got the crosshairs there. To do that, we click up on the set costume center, click as close as I can to the middle, and now this is the very center of my sprite. It doesn't matter so much in this one because I'm not doing anything special with my sprite, but when you start rotating your sprite, they rotate around the center, and if you haven't set the center properly, it might not rotate as you expect it. So I've got a very simple sprite here. I'm going to go into my scripts, and one of the things you noticed is that this is kind of flashing just to catch your attention. And if you recall from class, we want to get something happening when people start the program, when they click on the green flag. So I'm going to create some code that will happen with that regarding how the sprite looks. And we've talked about loops. I want my sprite to be flashing the entire time that the program is running. So I can create this loop here. This is a loop that's going to last forever. There's no way of getting out of this loop except stopping the program. If I start the program now, it shows in yellow that it's running. There's nothing happening because I don't have any code in this loop. Just to show you that this is running, while it's running, we could do something like move 10 steps, and once it's in here, basically, if you remember, move 10 steps will go in the direction that it's pointing, and by default things are pointing to the right. So we should just see this move off the screen if I drop it in here. And that's what it's done. And one thing that happens in Scratch is they don't go on forever. They just go until they reach the edge. So I'm going to move that out of here because I don't want that. And I'm actually going to click here and just move this back. So what I want to happen is I want this dot to blink. There's a couple ways of doing that. In the first version that I created, I actually went into costumes. I created a second version of the costume with a smaller dot on it. And then in my script, I told it to forever to switch between the two costumes. I was thinking about that a little bit, and I think there's a better way to do that. Instead of switching costumes, I'm just going to use this one costume and I'm going to change its size. So one thing I need to do is I need its size to shrink, and then I need it to grow again. So I haven't done this before. Hopefully this works. But I think what I want to do is, first thing I want to do is make it smaller. So I'm going to make it, let's say, -10. And then I'm going to make it 10, so that it will shrink by 10 and then grow by 10. And I'm actually not sure if this is going to work, because I'm not sure if this is changing by 10% or if it's changing by like 10 absolute sort of point sizes. But what I'm going to do is put those in here. Now these are going to happen so fast that you won't really see anything happen. Well, it might happen, let's see. So there's not much to see there. So what I'm going to do is just put a wait in here. Now 1 second is too long, so let's try half of a second. And what it's doing is it's sort of pulsing there. So why don't we say -50 and +50. And now one thing you'll see is it seems to be spending a lot of time in its smaller state and not a lot of time in its larger state. The reason is if you look at this block here, it's getting smaller by 50, and then we're waiting, and then it's getting larger by 50, and then we're looping back again, and almost instantaneously we're going back to get smaller again, which is why it's spending half of a second in its smaller state and almost no time in its larger state. So I'm just going to add in this again and change that to 0.5 and see what we get. And so now I've got a similar effect to what I had in my other program, but I'm only using one costume, and maybe we want it to flash a little bit faster than that. Okay, so we'll leave that there. So we've got one piece of code running, and all it's doing is running while the program runs and changing the size of the dot. The next thing we need to do is capture the button presses from the user and use those to move the dot around. So in order to do that, I need to create another loop. Again, this is another loop that's running forever. The entire time the program is running, and all it's going to do is check to see what the user has done. It's just waiting for input from the user. Just like the costume changing its size, I want this to run when I start the program. Now, while it's looping here forever as the program runs, I want to check if the user is doing anything. And so Scratch has this if statement. We talked about decisions. Okay, so the forever is a loop, which we talked about. The if statement is a decision. So it's going to check if a certain state is happening or a certain event is happening, and then any blocks of code that are inside of this if statement will only happen if this is true. So the first thing I want to do is decide what is it that I need to check for. And one of the things I need to check for is if somebody's pressing one of the arrow keys. So Scratch has this built in if the key is pressed. And what this means is if it's in its sort of down state, somebody's pushing down on the key. So I'm going to move that into here. So you just drag that block. You can see it's the same basic shape. And I don't want the space key, I want the arrow key. So I'm going to use the up arrow. Okay, so if the up arrow is pressed, something will happen. And I can put anything in here. I could put a sound here if I want. Alright, so this will play a meow sound if the up arrow is pressed. So I'll start my program. There we go. That's a familiar sound for everyone in our class. So that's not what I want to happen. What I want to do is I want to move my dot, my sprite. So I'm going to go to motion, and what you might think you want to do is move a certain number of steps, but this is and this, you could do this, you could change your direction and move in a certain number of steps. So if the up arrow is pressed, I could sort of change my direction to pointing up. Okay, actually, why don't we do that? I'm going to say move 5 steps, so it doesn't move as fast. And I'm going to say point 0. We talked very briefly about this. For now, you'll just have to trust me, that's pointing up. Again, I am just doing this from memory, so it might not work here. Basically, I'm saying if the up arrow is pressed, point up and move 5 steps. And I'm telling it to keep doing that the whole time that I'm pressing the up arrow. Okay, so I'm not pressing any arrows right now. I'm pressing the down arrow, left arrow, right arrow, nothing, up arrow. And it works. Another way I could do this same idea we talked about the X and Y directions. So X is moving, is our left and right direction, and Y is our up and down direction. So instead of pointing in a direction, because this is just a dot, it doesn't really have a, it looks the same no matter what direction it's facing, so that doesn't really matter to us. So what we could do is we could just say, if you're pointing up, we want to change the Y direction. Or sorry, the Y position. So if you change Y by a positive number, your y is going to, the y value of this dot is going to increase, which means it's going to move up. What I'm going to show you for a moment here is Scratch has some backdrops built in that we may have covered, and there's one here that's useful for explaining this called the XY grid. Okay, and so now you can see for your own reference the XY values. Okay, so let me go back to my sprite. I'm saying change Y by 5 if the up arrow is pressed. So I'll put that into my loop. I'm going to run my program, and I'm hitting the key, and my Y value is changing. So now I'm at a Y value close to 180. So in the time that I was holding down, when I was holding down the up arrow, this loop is going around and around and around, and Y is increasing by 5 every time it goes through this loop. One thing you might want to get used to is we need similar code for the down arrow, the right arrow, and the left arrow. So instead of dragging these blocks on, we can duplicate this. And I insert it right here, and I'm just going to say if the down arrow is pressed, change this by -5. While I'm at it, if the right arrow is pressed, I don't want to change Y. Y is my up and down direction. Okay. I want to change X. And just to make it so it's the same in all directions, I'll make that 5, the same speed. And my left arrow, I want to go in the opposite direction. I want to decrease the value of X. So this is a little bit of a different concept to understand, that the sprite has a position, and that position can be described with an X value and a Y value. So right now I've put it at X about 100 and Y about 100. And so when you change Y by 5, it's the Y value of the sprite that you're changing. Okay, so you're not changing the graph, you're changing an attribute of your sprite, the Y attribute, which is where it's located in the up and down dimension on the screen. So now I have this block of code which is running forever, and all it's doing is trying to sense if anything is happening. And I've said there's 4 types of events that can happen, or states of the keyboard that can happen, that I want to check for. And those are if the up arrow is pressed, the down arrow, the right, or the left. So I will start the program and press my arrow keys, and my sprite is behaving exactly as I expected it to. So I'm going to stop that. I'm going to go back to my stage. I'm going to click my backdrops, and I don't want to use the XY grid. I want to go back to my black backdrop because I think it looks better. And we'll just, now my code is running. You can see there's no scripts here. If that ever happens to you, that's because if you look down here, I've got my stage selected. So this area here is showing any code blocks that I have for my stage, which I don't have any for. Okay. My sprite has some code blocks here. So we're getting close. We now have a program that when you start the program, it starts the costume changing, and it gives the user the ability to move the sprite around, or the flashing dot around on the screen. Let's get these out of the way. The next thing we need to do is start drawing. And we covered this very briefly in class because I was just showing this as an example. I was mainly focusing in class on the bat, moving the bat around the screen. So a few things I want to do just to sort of get the program started. The first thing I want to do is I'd like to start it so that this sprite is always in the middle. So right now, if I hit the flag and I move it around and then I stop my program, next time I start it, it's going to begin where I left off. But that's not how I want my program to work. I want this flashing dot to always be at the center of the screen. So I'm going to use my motion block, and I'm just going to say go to an XY coordinate, and as we discussed, the very center of the screen, or the stage, is 0, 0. X is 0, Y is 0. I'm just going to create another when the flag is clicked and put that here. If I wanted to, I could actually put it up here. So there's no problem with that. I'm just going to put it here to help keep my blocks of code more organized so that each block is doing a very specific task. And so this is kind of like my setup block, my costume block, my sort of input block, and this one is just for the setup of the program. So now no matter where I move my sprite, when I hit start, it's going to start back in the middle. Stop the program, start it, it's back in the middle. Now one thing we haven't talked about again is the pen. So the pen is basically a way of drawing on the screen. And when you put the pen down, it will, when you move around, it will draw. So this is quite a straightforward thing. At some point, I need to put the pen down, and I'm going to set the pen color to whatever color I want to draw. So I don't know if I want dark blue. And this is the color picker. If you click on here, you can grab a color by pointing to something else. I'm just going to go to this white. There's probably a better way of doing that. So I'll start my program, and I now have my etch-a-sketch. So it looks like we're done, except we're not quite done. And I will show you why we're not done. When we hit stop and we start the program again, the first thing it did is it moved my flashing sprite dot to the center of the screen, and it drew a line to the center, which I don't want, and it left my old picture there. Now the reason that drew a line, if you look at this block of code here, it says go to 0, 0 and then put the pen down. The thing is, the pen was already down the last time I finished running the program, and Scratch will remember that. Not all programming languages will, but Scratch will. So I need to do a few things. The first thing I need to do is clear the screen. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the pen up. and then I'm going to go to 0, 0, and then I'll put the pen down, and then I'll set the pen color to be white. So now when I stop my program and start it, if I hit stop, my picture's there because there's nothing at the end of the program to tell it to clear. But when I start it, I've erased my old drawing and I'm ready to do a new drawing. So that is how the etch-a-sketch works. There's basically 3 components going on here. What you can see is there's a loop here to change how it looks, how the sprite looks by changing its size. There's a loop here that accepts input from the user and moves the sprite around based on that. And there's a script here that does some cleanup of the screen and puts the pen ready to start drawing. Now the program is running and you can see that these are highlighted in yellow, and that means that those are active right now. And they're active because they have a loop that runs forever. You can see that this is not active, and there's a reason for that, and that is there's no loop here. So when the program runs, each of these instructions runs once and then it's done. Okay. So these are still running and this one isn't. So that's the end of how to make an etch-a-sketch.